CNN cancels itself and go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennials joining me today, just one, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Welcome to this podcast. It's called CNN Cancels Itself. And we have a go woke or go broke podcast listeners. We have some of the funniest footage I have ever heard from Bill Maher. And Bill Maher literally justifies, in my opinion, why we are doing the dumbest bill in America. And that is towards the end of this podcast where we listen to Bill Maher. While we don't actually have a dumbest bill, he kind of gives us an idea of a dumbest bill that we can do perhaps next week. But first up, CNN cancels itself. How can a network possibly cancel itself? Well, if you're CNN, it's really easy, apparently, because, you have what? Cuomo, who gets fired from CNN because of all of his sexual advances, among other things. Not to mention, of course, he obviously is a complete shill for his brother, never should have been a primetime host on CNN to begin with, especially with his brother's various issues in the Capitol of Albany. But in addition to that, then you have a producer on CNN who gets charged with, right? Not alleged, but charged with the what? Grooming of young girls and kind of bringing them in for sexual trysts across the country. And that guy was arrested. And latest up, of course, Jeff Zucker gets fired because, although let's face it, that's not why, but because, according to CNN, he was having an affair with another person at CNN who was a high-ranking individual. Of course, everybody at CNN knew all of this stuff was going on. I am convinced. How could they not? So CNN literally is canceling itself in real time. In the Daily Caller, Stelter, Brian Stelter that is, says Chris Cuomo claimed that he was going to reveal incriminating information about Jeff Zucker. CNN's media correspondent, Brian Stelter, on Wednesday, of course, Tucker Carlson calls him the eunuch, that former CNN anchor Chris Cuomo was allegedly planning to reveal incriminating information about former CNN president Jeff Zucker prior to Zucker's resignation. Look, Zucker may have resigned, but he might as well have been fired. He resigned because he was going to be fired. Quote, number one is the Chris Cuomo reference. Cuomo was fired in December, and he is not going out quietly. He was fired, and there were reports that he was going to get paid millions of dollars that were going to be on the remainder of his contract, Stelter said. So, as a source said to me earlier today, a source, I love when CNN does that, reliable sources. We're not going to tell you who the sources are, but they're reliable. So, as a source said to me earlier today, Stelter said, he was trying to burn the place down. Cuomo was going to court trying to burn the place down and claiming that he had incriminating information about Zucker and Gollust. So if that's the case, if this is a domino effect that begins with Andrew Cuomo going down in the governor's office and then Chris Cuomo being fired by CNN and then Jeff Zucker losing his job at CNN, that was a remarkable domino effect, a chain of events. I think that is part of the story. Zucker announced Wednesday, okay, that was yesterday, he would be leaving the network due to a consensual relationship with his closest colleague that was required to disclose. He was supposed to disclose this at the time, but failed to do so. Zucker said he was questioned about the relationship as the network investigates Cuomo. Yeah, sure. I'm sure this has as much to do with the fact that CNN is literally canceling itself in the ratings and that they have hired pedophiles. They have hired sexual harassment experts who apparently do this on a daily basis. And then the guy who's on top, Jeff Zucker, excuse the pun, he actually is sleeping with one of the key people at CNN and at the network. Hard to believe. It's really hard for me to believe, at least, that this could have gone on for so long without the CNN executives not calling this out. So we have Brian Stelter and, of course, I think it's Allison Camerado and another anchor at CNN discussing this, of course, because, only CNN can discuss all of their issues, which is really kind of funny because it used to be CNN would report on the news that happened in the United States. At least that's what they're supposed to do. Instead, all the news is coming out of CNN. So that alone is funny. First up, we have a clip, and here's that discussion. Here it is.
Yes, and obviously we know Michael and Amy and Ken. We love them. We'll be in good hands. But I do just want to say something personal for a moment, if I may.
Sure.
And that is, I mean, I feel it deeply personally, but also I think I speak for all of us and our colleagues. This is an incredible loss. It's an incredible loss. Jeff is a remarkable person and an incredible leader. He has this uncanny ability to make, I think, every one of us feel special and valuable in our own way, even though he is managing an international news organization of thousands of people. I just know that he had this unique ability to make us feel special. And I don't think that comes around all the time. And I think, again, it's an incredible loss. And I just think it's so regrettable how it happened. If what you're reporting is true, these are two consenting adults who are both executives. That they can't have a private relationship feels wrong.
So that's Allison Camerado at CNN saying to Brian Stelter that Jeff Zucker knows how to make people feel special at CNN. Yeah, apparently he knows how to make the other producers and high executives feel special at CNN. Anyone else who would have done this in corporate America would have been, of course, terminated. And rightfully so, because Jeff Zucker never told anyone that he was doing this. That is obviously the primary issue. It's not that two people who are consenting adults can't have a relationship, get married, or what have you. It's that they're working at the same company. And there is obviously a conflict of interest. But CNN, that's what they're about. They're all about conflicts of interest and have been since well, at least they have been for the past 20 years. So we also have another clip. During this conversation, you're not going to believe this clip. The same conversation continues, all right? And this clip, you just aren't going to believe what they say at the end. Listen very carefully. It's about a minute long. Here it is.
Well, I think there's two layers I would add to that, okay? Number one is the Chris Cuomo reference. Cuomo was fired in December, and he is not going out quietly. He was fired, and there were reports that he wasn't going to get paid the millions of dollars that were going to be on the remainder of his contract. So as a source said to me earlier today, he was trying to burn the place down. He was going to court trying to burn the place down and claiming that he had incriminating information about Zucker and Gullist. So if that's the case, if this is a domino effect that begins with Andrew Cuomo going down the governor's office and then Chris Cuomo being fired from CNN and then Jeff Zucker losing his job at CNN, that is a remarkable domino effect, a chain of events. I think that is part of the story here. I would also point out there may be elements here we don't know, but for now what we do know is that through that Cuomo investigation, Zucker was asked about his relationship. He acknowledged it. He said he should have acknowledged it earlier, and that was the reason why Warner Media says he's out.
Yeah. There's certainly a clarity of mission and a clarity of vision for this network that will be missed. All right, Brian Stelter, thanks so much.
A clarity of mission and a clarity of, what was the other thing? Just general clarity at CNN. They're not going to have that anymore from Jeff Zucker. It's ridiculous. Clarity of what? Clarity of being a shill for the CCP? Or clarity of being a shill for the Democrat Party? I mean, that's the clarity that they're missing? Obviously, that's exactly the clarity that they're going to be missing. And so CNN has been canceling itself literally for 20 years because they really aren't a news organization. Proof be told, Katie Couric. You remember Katie Couric? She says many turned a blind eye to the Zucker-Gullist behavior. Former Today star Katie Couric said that many people turned a blind eye to the inappropriate behavior by CNN chief Jeff Zucker and network bigwig Allison Gullist, whose romantic relationship led to his resignation. I worked with Jeff Zucker for many years at NBC and later on my talk show, Kirk said. He was a talented and energetic producer. His resignation took me by surprise. And then she continues, I've also known that Allison Gullist, since my days at the Today Show, have wondered about the nature of their relationship. But I do know, as I wrote in my memoir, going there, that made me uncomfortable, Kirk, now 65, wrote. It seems their colleagues and the media at large turned a blind eye to inappropriate behavior, she said. Well, you know what? She turned a blind eye as well because she apparently knew about it. Obviously, she didn't work for CNN. So in theory, it wasn't her responsibility to report a consensual relationship at another network. But let's face it, had that been reported, well, then probably CNN would have been in better shape, potentially because they would have had a new producer, somebody who actually was interested in producing the news. Imagine that. And so CNN continues to cancel itself, podcast listeners, even with their stupid conversations and their pure jealousy about Joe Rogan. So on the Daily Wire, Brian Stelter mocked about complaining about Americans that trust Joe Rogan more than CNN. So CNN, rather than trying to gain viewers' trust so that the viewers come back to CNN, oh no, instead of trying to do what is obvious for a network that is engaged in the news, instead of that, they're mocking Joe Rogan because Rogan obviously has an audience that is far larger than all of CNN's audiences combined. And they're mocking him? It's so stupid. Can I tell you something, podcast listeners? Any reasonable executive at CNN would fire Brian Stelter too. Why would they fire him? Because rather than going back to the network and saying, okay, we need to regroup. We've lost Zucker. Okay, we've lost Cuomo. We've lost the pedophile producers. Now we should probably start really focusing on gaining viewers back and telling them the truth about what's really happening in the world and what's really happening in the United States. Oh no. Instead, Stelter is making fun of someone who has a massive audience, as if by making fun of them, CNN's tiny little audience is going to abandon Rogan. Well, CNN's audience is already abandoning CNN, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, how bad that is really getting. And so we have this little banter going on with Stelter on CNN where he literally makes fun of Rogan. We have that clip, and here it is.
The narrative is, I want to show all kinds of opinions.
Which sounds great, but not all opinions are created equal. You think about major newsrooms like CNN that have health departments and desks and operations that work hard on verifying information on COVID-19. And then you have talk show stars like Joe Rogan who just wing it, who make it up as they go along. And because figures like Rogan are trusted by people that don't trust real newsrooms, we have a problem that's much bigger than Spotify, much bigger than any single platform, Kate. But that's what is the heart of this right now.
Yeah, but you're right. It is getting at something bigger that isn't going to be solved in one Joe Rogan video or one statement from Spotify. That's for sure. It's good to see you, Brian. Thank you so much.
So can you please play that again, Mr. Producer? Because it's so stupid what they're saying. I just want you to listen to this again. Okay? Remember, CNN, they got people being fired, people losing their jobs, pedophiles, a lack of credibility, and they're attacking Joe Rogan. Listen how stupid this conversation is. Here it is.
The narrative is, I want to show all kinds of opinions.
Which sounds great, but not all opinions are created equal. You think about major newsrooms like CNN that have health departments and desks and operations that work hard on verifying information on COVID-19. And then you have talk show stars like Joe Rogan who just wing it, who make it up as they go along. And because figures like Rogan are trusted by people that don't trust real newsrooms, we have a problem that's much bigger than Spotify, much bigger than any single platform, Kate. But that's what is the heart of this right now.
Yeah, but you're right. It is getting at something bigger that isn't going to be solved in one Joe Rogan video or one statement from Spotify. That's for sure. It's good to see you, Brian. Thank you so much.
It's the dumbest thing I've heard. Yes, we have a problem much bigger than Joe Rogan. Our problem is that everybody at CNN is leaving or being fired because of the fact that they are sexual predators, or they're idiots, or they're breaking the corporate rules of dating people at the corporation, which they're not supposed to unless they disclose it, or they just aren't good liars. But the person who's the problem is Joe Rogan. He's the problem. We must make sure that we cancel Joe Rogan. And meanwhile, CNN, when they have those conversations amongst themselves, because the real news is CNN rather than Joe Rogan, they're literally canceling themselves. And so the Babylon Bee picked up on this, and the Babylon Bee has a title, "To ensure no sex scandals, CNN replaces all anchors with Mike Pence." And there's a picture of Mike Pence. And of course, it's like probably the most unsexual guy in the United States in politics. And so that's why. So it says in the Babylon Bee, as CNN's president, Jeff Zucker, and every other news anchor prepares to step down due to various disgusting allegations of criminal sexual perversion and adultery, the embattled fake news organization has announced that to keep this from happening in the future, they will be replacing all anchors and leadership positions with Mike Pence. Quote, I am truly humbled to serve as CNN's new president, CEO, primetime anchor, reliable sources anchor, newsroom anchor, inside politics anchor, new day anchor, situation room anchor, State of the Union anchor, and tonight's anchor, said Mike Pence. I will do my best to restore dignity, trustworthiness, and marital fidelity to the cable news network. Sources say Pence will also serve as executive producer, camera operator, and makeup artist for each show. Quote, it's too late for CNN to restore credibility to their disgraceful organization, said Tucker Carlson on his show later that night. Not even Mike Pence can save them. Carlson then made a baffled expression at the camera for a full 10 minutes before bursting into uproarious laughter. The Babylon Bee's female politics reporter reached out to Pence for comment, but he refused to give a statement as his wife wasn't present. Oh my gosh. In my next life or my next job, I want a job there. I mean, they are so funny. So funny. So good for Babylon Bee making fun of CNN as CNN implodes and is literally canceling itself. But podcast listeners, this is why we know this is happening, that CNN is imploding, okay? The GOP is making serious gains in Democrat areas, okay? In traditional Democrat areas, if you notice, I never say Democratic because the Democrat Party is not democratic. In the traditional Democrat areas, Republicans are winning over Hispanic voters and many other minorities as well, because Democrat policies are failing them. So this is in Fox News, but we have other sources as well. Republicans have continued to make serious inroads with Hispanic voters. Recent polls have shown, and that's especially true in Texas, where the GOP has ramped up its investments in Hispanic communities. Macarena Martinez, the Republican National Committee's Texas Communications Director, told Fox News Digital in a phone interview that the RNC's investment in the Lone Star State is the largest in the organization's history. That investment has included opening community outreach centers, which don't primarily focus on politics, across half of the southern state. The centers, which feature everything from movie nights to faith-based events to cryptocurrency trainings, that's kind of interesting, cryptocurrency trainings, are the GOP's primary way of engaging with voters, RNC Deputy National Press Secretary Nicole Morales, who was also on the call, told Fox News Digital. So there's this huge outreach to the Hispanic community in Texas. And there are inroads that are being made as a result of it. Okay? But it's not just Texas. In the Western Journal, voter registration data shows GOP gaining voters in hot swing state as Democrats lose big time. That's Arizona, by the way. New voter registration information released by the Arizona Secretary of State reveals that the Republican Party has increased its party affiliation advantage in the state of Arizona, a development with political implications in what was once one of the most contentious swing states in the nation during the 2020 elections. The GOP crossed the threshold of 1,500,000 registered voters in the state, staking out a numerical advantage of 137,000 actually voters over the Democrats. In other words, the GOP is gaining registration and registered voters who are Republican over the Democrats in the state of Alabama. And they break down the counties, and it's really kind of fascinating because the Democrats were so certain they were going to be able to flip Arizona. They were so certain they were going to flip the state of Texas. And they were certain because the whole idea was to get as many Hispanic voters including obviously people who aren't citizens of the United States, especially people who aren't citizens of the United States, and get them to populate those two states, in which case they would flip the states eventually when those individuals and or their children became citizens. So we know that that is happening, and yet it is backfiring on the Democrat Party. It's backfiring because all the Hispanics have to do is look at their bank account and say, I have less money than I've ever had because things cost more. And just go down the list. Go down the list of who you're really proud of in terms of leadership in the United States. Are you proud of a Democrat Party that is out to literally run the economy into the ground? And look, folks, for the Democrat listeners out there, you got to admit that this is happening. And here's the proof. Here's the proof of why you are losing voters. In the Daily Wire, Tucker Carlson Tonight is the most watched cable news show among Democrats. Democrats in a key age group. So, folks, I'm going to read part of this article. But if you are a Democrat now, and you are an elected Democrat in the United States of America, and the Tucker Carlson show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, is the most watched cable news show among Democrats in a key age group, you better start worrying. Tucker Carlson's primetime dominance has reached across the aisle, attracting more young Democrats than any other primetime cable news show. According to new TV viewership, data released by Nielsen MRI Fusion, reported by Mediate, Carlson's primetime show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, is the #1 most watched show among Democrats in the key demographic of 25 to 54-year-olds. Ladies and gentlemen, in podcast land, if you're the Democrat Party and you're losing 25 to 54-year-olds who are changing the channel from MSNBC, and they're changing the channel from CNN, which we already know is happening because CNN is imploding. They're changing the channel from ABC, CBS, NBC, and they're watching Tucker Carlson. And these are Democrat voters in this key demographic, right? Because it's a key demographic because they're going to be around for a long time to vote, right? These are young people. They're going to be here for a long time to vote. And they're actually physically taking the clicker and changing the channel, saying, you know what? That stuff I'm hearing on CNN and MSNBC and ABC, CBS, NBC, it just doesn't hold water. So the data from the month of October showed that Carlson pulled in 101,000 viewers who self-identified as Democrats in the 25 to 54 demographic. MSNBC's The Rachel Maddow Show and Fox's The Five were tied for second place, each attracting 88,000 viewers in the key Democrat who self-identified as Democrats, okay? Again, Rachel Maddow Show and The Five. So Rachel Maddow, of course, being on MSNBC and The Five on Fox, they each attracted 88,000 viewers in that same Democratic demographic, hard to say, easy for you to say, of, what was it, 25 to 54? So, in other words, Fox has one show, Tucker Carlson Tonight, that's pulling in more of those viewers than the other channels. And then you have The Five, who's matching it with Rachel Maddow. You know, and Rachel Maddow, of course, is a left wing. And by the way, my understanding is that she's taking a break. That's what I just read. I think I read recently. She's taking a break. Yeah, she's taking a break because you're losing. You're losing. You want to know when she's going to come back? She's going to come back when the Republicans take over so she can start like trashing them and lying and doing everything that she's done for the past, since her career started. Because she's really not interested in reporting actually news, which is why, by the way, podcast listeners, they are losing these viewers. So Maddow still has a significant advantage in total Democrat viewership, pulling in a total of 908,000 viewers across all age groups. The Five pulled in the second most, with 732,000 viewers who identified themselves as Democrats. And Carlson followed close behind with 722,000 total Democrats. Hannity and MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell rounded out the top five with Hannity garnering 623,000 Democrat viewers, and O'Donnell taking 607,000. In addition to taking 3 out of the 5 top spots among Democrats, Fox News' primetime lineup has a stranglehold on independents, the key demographic. So, folks, all you Democrats out there who are listening, Republicans and independents, Fox News, their primetime lineup has a stranglehold on independents. It's where the independents are going, and that's where they're staying. Tucker Carlson Tonight, The Five, Hannity, Special Report with Bret Baier, and the Ingram Angle occupy all 5 of the top slots among self-identified independents. Independents! Do you have any idea how important that is? So if you are an elected Democrat, your party's in trouble because your party doesn't believe in anything. And it's hysterical that you even have, of all people, Jen Psaki going out there saying, oh, well, we never said we wanted to cancel the police. We never said we don't want police policing on the streets. We never said that. Oh, no, we never did that. You know what? It's too late. It's too late, Jen. It's too late, Democrats. That's exactly what you said. And it's exactly what you mean. You're ruining America's cities. You're ruining America's economy because of inflation. And you're also ruining America's schools because of your trans indoctrination and because of CRT ideologies. Your so-called anti-racism, which is, of course, the exact opposite of anti-racism. It's racism policies in public schools. And when you're losing independence en masse, and when Democrat voters are changing the channel to, of all places, Fox, okay, then you have to say to yourself, we have a problem. Houston, there's a problem. So next up, podcast listeners, Bill Maher says the left is lost. So as you can tell, we've talked about this podcast that CNN is canceling itself basically with all of these scandals. And Bill Maher is like, it's no wonder the left is lost. Why is the left lost? Well, we have a series, podcast listeners, of 4 clips, 4, and they are hysterically funny. You got to listen to this. So funny. But the very last clip of this series talks about why and how the Democrats are losing America in large part because there are too many laws, which goes right to the reason we do the dumbest bill in America on this podcast. So I want you to hang around for this because we have 4 clips. First up, the left is lost. All 4 clips are going to follow from the same segment. Here's the first clip. Here it is.
People sometimes say to me, you didn't used to make fun of the left as much. Yeah, because they didn't give me so much to work with. The oath of office I took was to comedy. And if you do goofy shit, wherever you are on the spectrum, I'm going to make fun of you because that's where the gold is. And the fact that they are laughing at it should tell you something. It rings true.
So Bill Maher talking about how the left is lost, right? In his comedy skit here. And he does this whole segment on how the left is lost. And his audience is like clapping like crazy. Now, podcast listeners, if you're on the left and or if you are an elected official on the left, you better start worrying when people on your side of the aisle start clapping and laughing at Bill Maher. But we've had on Mark and the Millennials, Bill Maher and segments from his show many times in this podcast. And we've had it many times in this podcast because he's the traditional liberal who likes to laugh at himself and laugh at others. It's what comedy is supposed to be about. So we have the next clip of The Left is Lost from Bill Maher, and here it is.
When normal people read that San Francisco has basically legalized shoplifting, they think Democrats have gone nuts. They think, that Ted Cruz guy seems like a real stiff. But at least he believes in the concept of shopping with money.
I mean, so sarcastic and so funny, right? You got San Francisco, you can steal up to $950 worth of stuff. One person can, and not be prosecuted, not go to jail, not have to pay restitution. Podcast listeners, not have to pay restitution? I mean, there used to be a teaching moment in America, right? Okay, you stole it. And then the little, let's talk about Americana, okay? The kid goes up to the store, he steals a candy bar. That's where it starts, right? Before they get older and then they start stealing more and more things. The kid gets caught. And what is the teaching moment? The teaching moment is the kid has to work off the candy bar. The kid has to work it off. So what does that mean? I don't know, sweep the store, vacuum the floor, weed the garden in front of the store, clean the glass and the windows in the store, maybe a day's worth of work. Why a day's worth of work? Because the teaching moment there is that stealing is wrong. Yet in San Francisco, they're saying in their policy that stealing is right, that stealing is correct, that you ought not go to jail, that you ought not be arrested, that you do not have to pay back the state or the store. There is no teaching moment. So why wouldn't you continue to do it? Thus, Bill Maher's point, the left is lost. So next up with the left is lost from Bill Maher, we have another clip, and here it is.
It's not my fault that the party of FDR and JFK is turning into the party of LOL and WTF. Members of Congress tweeting things like cancel rent, cancel mortgage, and no more policing or incarceration, declaring that capitalism is slavery, canceling Lincoln and Dr. Seuss, teaching children they're oppressors and math is racist, making Mr. Potato Head gender neutral, and now an emoji for pregnant men. Real, I'm not making it up. California just passed a law requiring large retailers to have a non-gendered toy section. A non-gendered toy section? Isn't Ken enough?
And then Bill Maher shows a picture of Ken, of course. And for anyone who has had a child or a childhood with the Ken doll, you will know that Ken, there's no anatomical parts that are there, right? It's just like this basic plastic doll and there's nothing there. So he shows the picture of Ken because Ken is non-binary when you take Ken's clothes off. And so you have Bill Maher making fun of that. So funny, okay? So funny because anytime, as we've talked about on Mark and the Millennials, you have the left having emojis or Apple having a pregnant man emoji and thinking that that's normal, the left is lost, right? You've lost your mind. And we have to make fun of it because if we didn't make fun of it, if we didn't laugh, we would think that we've been maybe abducted by aliens potentially and living in some alternative universe, but we're still here. And this is what the left has become. So podcast listeners, we have a final clip from Bill Maher where he talks about why the left is lost. And I have to say something that I'm really proud about here at Mark and the Millennials. You all know that we talk about the dumbest bill in America. And the reason we have the dumbest bill in America, and it can be a bill from any state, from any local government, it can be from the federal government. We talk about the dumbest bill in America because we believe in Mark and the Millennials, as we've said from the very beginning, that there are too many laws that are being passed, too many regulations that are being put into place, too many rules, and all of which regulate every aspect of human life. It's too much. We don't need you to regulate our human life. We don't need you to put in more rules. And there are need for rules in certain cases. There are, okay? And Bill Maher talks about it in this last clip, but he literally talks about, at the same time, the fact that we have these laws that are being passed and they're stupid and they're taking away human freedom. And human freedom cannot be regulated. We cannot regulate every aspect of our lives. And he even brings up the idea of a car alarm. And you have to listen to why this car alarm exists. And the fact that it was put into federal law, I think it was the infrastructure bill, if I'm correct. Podcast listeners, here's the final clip of the Left is Lost series from Bill Maher. Here it is.
We need a law for that? You have to inject yourselves into everything, from where you can throw a frisbee to who can braid hair? This is why so many people, by the way, were triggered by COVID policies. They were already sick of rules. Regulation should be a good issue for Democrats. It's certainly one they're associated with. And I think the average voter would agree that banks and chemical plants and drug companies need watching. Telling a company, you can't dump the waste from your hog farm straight into the water supply. We're mostly all for that. But Democrats have become a parody of themselves, just making rules to make rules because it makes you feel like you're a better person. Making sure that everything bad never happens again, which you can never fully do. It just makes everyone else's life a drag. The Biden infrastructure bill has a provision that requires all new cars to install an alert system that goes off when you leave a baby in the back seat, which is something done only by crackheads and people who sadly, yes, do it on purpose. And after every one of us winds up bearing the cost for cars to install this alarm, you know who's going to ignore it? Crackheads and people who do it on purpose.
Bill Maher, The Left Is Lost, those segments literally covers why we have the dumbest bill in America, right? We have the dumbest bill in America every single podcast that we can. And sometimes it's hard to do so much research on this because we try to bring in the clips in the dumbest bill in America. But he talks about this, Maher does, because of the fact that we have so many laws and so many rules. And he brought up that example, the example of the fact that the Biden infrastructure bill has inside of it, of all things, a requirement that car manufacturers have to put an alarm in the car so that you are reminded that you left your baby in the car. And as he said, the only people that leave their babies in the car are sadly people that are doing it on purpose and crackheads. And yet you think that by putting this law into place, that's going to increase the cost of cars, that it's going to fix that problem? The fact that the rest of us, of course, have now going to have this stupid alarm in the car, like one more thing to have to pay for. And rather than just educating people about the fact that they probably should really think twice before having children, because it's a responsibility that's lifelong. And naturally, Bill Maher is talking about this and putting humor and injecting it in this. But the thing is, who else in the Left podcast listeners is making fun of the left? What other comedian in America is really making fun of the left? And by the way, let's be fair, Bill Maher makes fun of the right probably more so than he does the left. It's just that he seems to be like the only guy who's doing it, namely making fun of both sides and fearless about the backlash from the left when he talks about the fact that there are too many laws and too many regulations. And in fact, the producer here, Christopher Hopkinson, and I, we're actually talking about the fact that there are plenty of Republicans that put in stupid bills. All right. I mean, in my own state, we had a Republican that put in a bill, as we've talked about before, on the dumbest bill in America. And the bill's purpose was to ban the release of helium balloons. So in other words, you get those balloons, you go to the party store, they put helium in them. Maybe you get 10 of them. Well, he banned the fact that you can release them. You can't release those balloons because, they might end up in waterways and so forth. But his bill went even further and said you can't have a mass release of these balloons. You can't have a mass release. And if you do, we're going to give you a ticket. That's what we're going to do. And so too many laws, too many regulations, too many rules that regulate every aspect of human life. Because what if a kid were to do that? Okay, what if a kid had 10 balloons and he intentionally released them? If he intentionally released them, then he would be responsible for paying this ticket. Enough already with the laws. That's what I'm saying. Okay? Enough already with passing so many laws. Legislators across the 50 states, congressmen, congresswomen, enough with constantly putting in more rules and regulations and more laws. We don't need them. What we need you to do is to leave us alone. And literally, it's hard to believe, but that's where Bill Maher, The Left Is Lost, and Mark and the Millennials intersect, because we absolutely positively are in complete agreement on this. So next up, podcast listeners, we have Go Woke or Go Broke. In the Daily Caller, a national spice retailer that called Republicans racist asks customers to buy gift cards to save the company. So a national spice retail company that called Republicans racist earlier this month began to ask people to purchase gift cards after the company lost thousands of customers. Multiple sources have reported this. Penzeys Spices, Chief Executive Bill Penzy, sent an email to his customers on January 14th calling Martin Luther King Jr. Day, quote, Republicans are racist weekend. This is the CEO. Penzy sent out another email Friday asking customers to purchase gift cards, saying that the company lost 40,005 subscribers, or 3% of its customer base, since he sent this letter. So this idiot CEO sends out a letter of all things. Right, he's the CEO of a spice company. Sends out a letter and just puts it out there, Republicans are racist. So stupid. I mean, why would you do that? Because you're selling spice. You're not selling politics. People don't want to be lectured to when they're buying spice. And so this is the go woke and go broke. The spice company hopes that the gift card sale might make it a bit easier for some to share and possibly get a few good new customers to replace the ones they've lost. So they've had a net loss in that company of subscribers, because I guess you subscribe online and then you get the spices sent to you on a regular basis, or updates or specials, like any kind of subscription service. And this dummy doesn't know where he is, because I think this company is located in Wisconsin. And he goes ahead and literally attacks at least half of his customers, perhaps more. Seems like more. A Wisconsin-based company and spice company that made headlines earlier this month when its CEO sent an email to customers accusing Republicans of racism is now asking people to buy gift cards after hemorrhaging tens of thousands of customers. And that's in Fox News. So this has made numerous, of course, news outlets out there. It's made the news. And you have to ask yourself the question, what would cause a CEO to just wake up one day and say, you know what I want to do? I think that if I send this statement out there, I'm going to be so virtuous. Everybody's going to love me. They're going to just love me because it's about me. And it's really not at that point, because you actually have a responsibility to all of your employees, all the people that work for you. And you make one stupid comment, which ought not be made as the CEO. And podcast listeners, I want to make this clear. This guy made the comment as CEO. He sent the letter on his stationery. That's how he did it. It's not like he did this privately as a private citizen outside of his role as CEO, in which case, fine, say whatever you want to say. But when you're putting so many jobs at risk, it just seems kind of stupid. Really does. And so increasingly across America, people are being fed up with this wokeism. And that's why we do this segment of Go Woke or Go Broke, because increasingly the American people are pushing back and saying, I really don't want this to happen anymore. Really tired of it. I don't want to be lectured to, so I'm just going to buy some other product, because the other products don't really judge me based on my political affiliation or how I look. They just want me to buy their product. And in so doing, they want to leave me alone. And that's Go Woke or Go Broke. And next up, podcast listeners, I just want to talk very briefly before we sign out about Biden's diversion. So inflation's at a record high, okay? America's cities, big cities, are falling apart. Public education is in shambles. We have people that don't want to work because they're being paid not to. And we can just go down the list. We have China that's testing America. We have Russia that's testing America. And Biden is trying to create this diversion, okay? And I do believe that much of this is created. I know what you're going to say. Oh, no, the Russians brought up all of their tanks and so forth to the border of the Ukraine. That's obviously true. But I've said before in this podcast, what is it that we have been doing? All of our services like the CIA and others, what have we been doing in the Ukraine prior to that? Are we, potentially arming the Ukraine, which maybe made the Russians really upset? And now there are some stories that are coming out that the Ukraine was actually developing some rockets, and the Russians, of course, didn't like that. Well, were we helping them? And so now we have this diversion, right? This diversion away from our economy. And that's really what Afghanistan was for at least 5 or 6 years, a diversion away from our economy. And the media would always pivot to international affairs. And meanwhile, of course, jobs were leaving the United States and being exported primarily to China and Asia in general. And so Biden is no different, by the way, than any other president, because presidents do this. When they become incredibly unpopular at home, what do? Well, there's some sort of international issue that we must engage in, or the world is doomed. Meanwhile, in the United States of America, our economy is not even close to being a strong economy. I don't care what anyone says. It's clearly not. How could it be? With inflation spiraling out of control, it is not a good economy. So be prepared for the Biden administration to continue in this direction, especially as this is an election year. And as the election in November gets closer, I am certain there's going to be some sort of international event that the Democrat Party is going to engage in, because of Russia. Well, that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.